Well, we've been hitting some of the most difficult questions that we as Christians face. In fact, some of the questions we've been covering the last few weeks are grievances that people have against Christianity or even the concept of God. And the last couple were pretty heavy. This week is no less controversial because this week we're going to be asking the question, don't many roads lead to heaven? I mean, there's got to be more than one way, right? I mean, just one way, that'd be exclusive. And that's not right. There's got to be more than one road, one way into heaven. Actually, 68% of American evangelicals say, yes, there's lots of roads. And maybe that shouldn't surprise me, but it does. And exclusive Jesus is not going to sit well in an inclusive society, especially in a day when popular Christianity wants to fit in with the rest of pop culture. And so the idea of Jesus being the only way, that just doesn't fit. Which is why we find a majority of professing Christians saying that Jesus is just one of many ways. As long as you're sincere in what you believe, as long as you're an overall good person, you'll eventually find yourself in heaven. And I've heard it this way, and I think you probably have as well. This has been an often repeated kind of a story to tell that helps us understand how all the religions can work together to help us understand the truth. And it's been compared to four blind men. They come across this elephant, they bump into an elephant, and they try to describe what they are feeling, what they're sensing. They all grab hold of some part of the elephant, and they begin to describe what it's like. And one man, he grabs a hold of the trunk of the elephant. He says, the trunk is, well, it's long and it's very flexible. It's like a snake. But another grabs a hold of the leg of the elephant, and he says, oh no, it's not. It's like a stump of a tree. It's thick and it's very strong and very thick. And a third is feeling the elephant's side, and he goes, no, it's big and like a wall, and it's straight. It's entirely different. And then the guy who grabs a hold of the tusk, he finds something completely different as well. No, it's not. It's sharp and hard and tubular. And they begin to argue. And then the storyteller or the observer, the one who sees everything, he says something like, well, each one is right, but each one is wrong. They have a part of reality. None of them see the whole picture and shouldn't claim to. And they conclude then, the conclusion of this whole analogy is that religion is the same thing. You think you see God this way, Muslims see God this way, Buddhists see enlightenment, divinity this way, and if you put it all together, you've got the full picture of who God is. So religions, like the blind men, should stop being so exclusive of other perspectives. And it sounds great, right? I mean, it sounds, okay, well, that's a cool story. But the problem is, the only way you could tell each blind man held only a piece of the elephant, the only way that you could know that is if you, the storyteller, the one observing this or using an analogy, if you see the whole elephant. And that's a claim to exclusivity. So the person who's making this analogy is saying, everybody else is blind. I'm the one that sees the whole thing, and I can put it all together where none of them can because they're blind. And that is an exclusive claim. Everyone else is blind, but the storyteller isn't. So to say that all religions have a piece of truth is to say, yeah, but I have the whole truth, so I can see that the pieces fit together. So you have what you're saying nobody else has, the whole truth. That's a claim to exclusivity. The reality is, whether you believe one religion is correct or all religions are correct, you're being exclusive in some way because everyone believes they see the whole truth, while others don't. We all think that we see the whole elephant. And let's be honest, that's the problem a lot of people have with Christianity. I mean, Jesus can't be the only way. There's got to be more roads. To claim that Jesus is the only way, not only is that exclusive, it's at its best politically incorrect. It's offensive, and it feeds the division among religions. I mean, how could we believe this? And we have to remember, too, who we're talking about when we're talking about Jesus being the only way. Most of us, at least part of the bridge, most of us at the bridge, we see Jesus as God, as divine, the one who holds all things together, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. In Revelation, the rider of the white horse who will return with fire in his eyes. Most of us believe all of that about Jesus. But to the vast majority of others around the world, I mean, that's not Jesus. To most people, We're simply talking about a guy who was born 2,000 years ago in a rural hick town, the kind of town where the guys are working on their El Caminos out in the front lawn, a hillbilly kind of a place. That's the kind of town that Jesus grew up in. Born to a teenage girl who wasn't married at the time, adopted by a blue-collar guy named Joe who worked with tools for a living, and that's how they see Jesus. Now, the truth is, the majority of Jesus' life was lived in relative obscurity. Not much is known about him until he was about 30. It's safe to assume that when he was growing up, he played with his brothers, James and Jude, who wrote later books of the Bible. And as Jesus got older, the assumption is that he went to work with his dad, building, probably mostly stonework and maybe some furniture. And he would have been a guy that was in good shape. I mean, he walked everywhere he went, and because he was in Nazareth, where there wasn't a lot of building going on, he would have had to walk to neighboring towns. He did a lot of walking. He would have been in good shape. He wasn't the lanky, awkward, beauty pageant cross-dresser that you see him depicted in a lot of the pictures and paintings. He was just a normal guy who was in good shape, who wore a tool belt. And then about the age of 30, he began his ministry, teaching and healing. He was later put to death because of that ministry, because in that ministry, in his teaching, and even in his healings, he claimed to be God. Which is quite a claim for a guy with an unimpressive resume. You stop and think about it. He was never married, never had any kids. He never campaigned for political office. In fact, never held a position where he had legal authority over others. He was never a CEO, a CFO, a CPA, never got his MBA, wasn't viewed as being a successful, wealthy person. He never even traveled more than 500 miles from where he was born. And yet today, it's pretty incredible when you think about it. Today, Jesus is the most extraordinary, the most controversial, the most loved and most hated individual who has ever walked the planet. Today, a few people claim to be followers of him. More songs have been sung to him, more paintings painted of him, more books have been written about him than any other figure in history. History even rotates around him, BC, before Christ, AD, Anno Domini, or in the year of our Lord, speaking of Jesus. And around the world there are billions who claim to follow him. And of those couple of billion, a huge percentage, including this church, believes he's the only way that we can get to God, that he is the one way into heaven. Now, the Apostle Paul wrote that there would be a lot of perspectives floating around about Jesus, a lot of different opinions and impressions and weird teachings about Jesus, and whether or not you believe what Paul wrote in the Bible or not, you got to admit what Paul said would happen came true. There's a lot of different Jesuses out there. For example, Jesus has been dragged into mainstream pop culture. One of Jay-Z's earlier popular songs, H to Izzo and V to the Hizzy, which you may want some translation for that if you're trying to figure out what it actually is about. But Jay-Z was saying that he was Jesus in that song. Bruno Mars blames his freshness on Jesus. And of course, some of you older people that are watching this, you have no idea what I'm talking about. It's only us young people who would understand that reference. But you remember the Beatles, right? And John Lennon, an incredibly talented person who was also an atheist, he said this. He said, "We're bigger than Jesus now." And then he died. And he saw Jesus. And Jesus says, "Nah, John, you're wrong. See, I'm bigger." But you got Carrie Underwood's Jesus Take the Wheel, Green Day, Nirvana, Bruce Springsteen, all took their shots at writing about Jesus and describing what Jesus is or was like. Kanye's album, Jesus is King. I actually really like that album. That's just music. Then you get to TV. I mean, we could go on and on with a lot of popular shows. Jesus makes regular appearances on The Simpsons. He shows up on South Park, usually to fight Satan or Saddam Hussein. He's on Family Guy and Futurama and American Dad. He's everywhere. Jesus has been dragged into the pulp culture spotlight, and most of the time, it's not an accurate depiction. But even still, it has influenced how a lot of people view Jesus. Even church people. And actually what has happened now, because of all the different views of Jesus and descriptions of Jesus and people wanting to say what Jesus is like, what happens now is that really Jesus has become whoever you want him to be. You can project your image of what you want Jesus to be like, and a lot of people, that's what they do. They describe Jesus just in ways that they want Jesus to be. If you want an all-loving granola yoga master kind of guy, then he can be that. You want a Jesus who hates the person that you hate or the people that you hate, you got that. You want Jesus to be Republican? All right, well, he likes a donkey then. If you want Jesus to be a Democrat, I got a book in my office that Jesus was a liberal. Well, then Jesus comes riding in on a donkey, which we know that he did that. You want him to be white? Well, then he's white. You want him to be black? Well, then you can make him black. To most of the world, Jesus, he simply has become a template for whatever you want him to be. That's most of the world today. We just project on Jesus what we want him to be. And a case in point, if you look at some of these political movements and how they've treated Jesus over time, you look what atheist philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote. He said, Jesus died too soon. If he would have lived to my age, he would have repudiated his doctrine. Yeah, he would have become an atheist. Jesus would have become an atheist like me. Or the American psychologist Rollo May said, Christ was the therapist for all humanity. So he's the great psychologist in the sky. Or you got Fidel Castro. Me and Jesus, we believe the same thing. He was a good communist. And then Gorbachev, not to be outdone, said Jesus was the first socialist. Adolf Hitler. I mean, look at Hitler said. He said, how terrific Jesus' fight for the world against the Jewish poison. I mean, Jesus was Jewish himself. And yet Hitler wanted to make him a Nazi. And this is what we do. We have taken Jesus and squeezed him into whatever agenda we want. So my Jesus is different than your Jesus, and their Jesus is different than that Jesus. And world religions, they do this too. You ever hear that saying, all religions basically say the same thing? Actually, when you study the world religions, they don't. In fact, some of their ideas and views are diametrically opposed to each other. But when it comes to Jesus, no, they say all different kinds of things. They say the Baha'i belief, for example. A Baha'i belief is that Jesus is a manifestation or prophet of God, but inferior to Muhammad or Baha'u'llah. Then the popular Buddhist take on Jesus is that he is not God, but he was enlightened, much like Buddha. Hinduism has lots of different views on Jesus, but most Hindus would either agree that Jesus is enlightened like Krishna or that he is one of many gods, but not the God. Islam teaches that Jesus is a prophet, but lesser than Muhammad. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Jesus was a created angel, the Archangel Michael. The classic Mormon teaching on Jesus is that he is not God, but he was a polygamist who was the half-brother of Lucifer or Satan, and that he worked to achieve divinity. Universalism claims that Jesus is kind of like Ryan Gosling, super nice guy, only has nice things to say, and is just taking everybody to heaven. Then you got many New Agers, and the New Agers believe that Jesus, not so much to be a man or a god, but a state of consciousness. And then there's Scientology, which is the popular celebrity religion. Teaches that Jesus was an implant forced upon Thetan. And imagine some of you are looking at your screens with an inquisitive look, hoping I'm going to explain it to you, but I can't. I can't explain it. I've never done drugs, so my imagination is limited. But again, what we've done is we've taken Jesus and projected whatever we want him to be onto him to fit who we think he should be and the agenda that we want him to serve. And as a result, there are 1 billion different Jesuses out there. So there must be 1 billion different ways to heaven, right? Well, the truth of the matter is, it really doesn't matter what Jay-Z or Bruno say about Jesus. It doesn't matter what Nietzsche or Gorbachev or the Mormons or Universalists say about Jesus. What matters, the real question, and it isn't about what I think or what I would say about Jesus. The real question is, what did Jesus say about himself? Because most of the pop culture and historical figures and religions, all of them agree that Jesus is at the very least worth listening to. I mean, Islam, Baha'i, they would say Jesus is a prophet. A prophet is at least worth listening to. The Hindus and Buddhists see Jesus as being enlightened. Again, if you're enlightened, you're worth listening to. Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, they see him at the very least as an angel. Well, if an angel came, we'd want to listen. That's someone worth listening to. Pop culture wouldn't bring him up if he was irrelevant. Historical figures wouldn't force him into their view if they didn't think that Jesus mattered. And so Jesus' words matter. So since Jesus is at least worth listening to, then we've got to ask ourselves, what did he say about himself? That's worth considering. So let's do just that. Actually, we're going to get into John chapter 14. I'd encourage you to grab your Bibles and take a look at this and see the context and read below and above, even as I'm talking, because this is such a great passage. It's a fairly well-known passage among church people, but if you're not a church person, or if you're new to Christianity, or you're just here because of the series, you're watching this because of the series that we're doing, well, then it'd be good for you to see this passage. But John 14 takes place in an interesting time in Jesus' life. It's towards the end of his life. In fact, it's towards the end of his ministry. He and his disciples, kind of a small crew, were on their way to Jerusalem for the last time. They'd been to Jerusalem before, and things didn't go down very well, and there are other times in Jerusalem. They're always up against the religious leaders who were trying to minimize his effect, and he was up against some of the governmental leaders as well. They didn't like the impact that he was having, and then they viewed him as a threat. So it didn't go well in Jerusalem the other times he had been there. And now he gives them this stunning news. He tells his disciples that they're going to Jerusalem, and he tells them that he's going to die there. Now, that was upsetting. In fact, there was a little bit of a tiff that was going on among the disciples and trying to argue back with Jesus, saying, no, that's not going to happen. And Peter even said, I will give my life to protect you. And Jesus said, oh, yeah, when I die, you're going to wind up denying me during that whole episode. And, Peter said, no, there's no way I will. But all of this is upsetting the disciples, the idea that Jesus says, I'm going to Jerusalem, and when I get to Jerusalem, after a little bit, and actually just a couple days, I'm going to die there. That was upsetting to them. And so Jesus is going to settle them down a little bit, beginning in verse 1. And we can understand how any of us would feel if we had a loved one, somebody that we really cared about, that said, I'm only going to live for another 2 weeks. That's how these disciples were feeling. And so we can understand Jesus' initial words here. He starts off just by saying, let not your hearts be troubled. Don't be upset about this. He said, do not let your hearts all be upset about this. Believe in God. Believe also in me. What Jesus says here is an incredible claim to divinity. I think we miss this. He's not just saying, believe us both. Because this is a Greek parallel. And the word there for believe, pisteuo, means to trust in or to depend on. Jesus is saying, in the same way that you are trusting in and depending on God who is their entire sustenance for everything, he was the creator of the universe. They believed that the food that they received came from God, that the loved ones that they had in their lives, that all of this was given to them by God. Their very life, every breath that they breathed, every heartbeat, all of this came from God. They believed in God for this. They trusted, depended on God for this. And now Jesus was saying, in the same way you are believing in God, I want you to believe in me. I want you to trust in me. That was a claim to divinity. He continues on. He says, in my Father's house are many rooms. And if it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? Now, this actually seems to have nothing to do with what he was just talking about, but it really does, because he's helping them to understand why he was going to Jerusalem and why he was going to give his life. And so it's kind of a bonus. Now, if you're familiar with the old King James Version, the most original, popular version of English version of the Bible that was around for hundreds of years, in there was the translation said that in my Father's house there are mansions, many mansions, and so there's this popular Christian view that we have mansions in heaven. That's what this verse is teaching, and actually it was a mistaken translation. The word is not mansion. The word actually it's a very interesting word. It's an insula, and the word is referring to the homes that they would build back in the day, and they're in rural Jerusalem, actually all around Israel, rural Israel, but also even in big cities like Jerusalem. These insulas they would be constantly adding on to these houses. They would build a house. When a household was established, the house would be built, and then every time that household expanded, the son would grow up, he would go out, bring his bride home. They would have built a room for him to get established in his parents' household, so they would be added then to the son's parents' household. And every time another child brought a spouse home, they would add on to the house. And so there would be a large courtyard and common area where cooking would be done, but then there would be the individual insulas. And that's the wording that Jesus is using here. And so he's painting this picture of heaven. He is saying that he is the groom, the church is the bride, and he's preparing rooms in his Father's heavenly insulas for us. Speaking to the disciples, he says, I am going to Jerusalem so I can get heaven ready for you. So the next life for Jesus followers, we won't have a house, like a mansion with a big view, off in the distance and, looking at God's house, which is the huge mansion. No, instead, we're actually all going to be in his house. And we're going to be living in community. That's why whenever I hear someone say, I don't like the church, or I'm done with the church, I think, man, you're not going to like the next life either then, because it's community. In fact, I really question whether you understand what this Christian thing is all about, because the Christian thing is all about community. You're going to hate heaven, because in heaven we're going to be a lot closer than we are now. But we won't have the sin problem, so we won't be as annoying as we might be with each other then. But you won't also be as arrogantly critical as you are now. I love church bashers. But that's the picture. Jesus is painting this picture of where he wants to take us to his insula, this giant community in heaven. And that might be a little unnerving for us introverts, but we're going to be fine. All right, so he continues on. He says, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. So he's explaining why he's going to Jerusalem. He's going to Jerusalem to prepare a place for all of them to be able to come to heaven, to be with him, and he's going to bring them back with him to heaven. And then he says, and you know the way to where I am going. Now, at this point, I think there's a little bit of awkward silence. He says, and you know the way to where I'm going. And I think a couple of them, maybe Peter, John, they're like acting like, yeah, we know. But fortunately, Thomas is the one who speaks up. We call him Doubting Thomas. He's the one that questions everything. He's like, wait a minute, Jesus. We don't even know what you're talking about. What are you talking about here? And this is what we read. Lord, how do we know where you're going? We do not even know where you are going. How can we know the way? He said, we're not really sure what you're talking about. And Jesus says, really? You don't? And finally, John and Peter are like, we don't really know what you're talking about here. And I'm glad Thomas spoke up, because then Jesus responds with these beautiful words that so many Christians have memorized. So we have these beautiful words coming back from Jesus. He said to him, I am the way. Because he had said, you know the way. And Thomas says, we don't even know where you're going, much less the way. And Jesus says, here's the way. I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now, as many Christians that have this memorized, as many Christians who know this verse so well, I think we miss so much. There's so much in this little verse that is incredible. I want us to take that apart a little bit. First of all, Jesus says, I am the way. I am the way. It's kind of cool. Right after Jesus left the earth, after his death and resurrection, and then he came back and was with the disciples for a while, and then he ascended into heaven, the early Christian group, the earliest name that they had for themselves was the way. They called themselves the way. They didn't call themselves Christians. Other people began calling them Christians a little bit later on, because they said they were like Jesuses. They were like little Jesuses, taught the same things Jesus taught, tried to live the way Jesus lived. And so they called them Christians. And they didn't call themselves the church. That was, again, that simply means gathering. That's what they called them, when they would all gather together. But they referred to them as the way because of this evening when Jesus taught this truth. He says, I am the way. And they were referring to themselves as being on Jesus' way. Now, it's important for us, and I think you have to notice here that how Jesus uses this term, because we have this definite article that's very important. Jesus doesn't say, I am one of many ways. In fact, he doesn't say, I am a way. It's singular, but it's definite. I am the way. Jesus refuses to be a way because he wants us to understand he is the way, not just a way. Now, the word way is the Greek word for road. When he says, I am the way, he says, I am the road to heaven. Now, something to understand during the time of Jesus, the highway system was certainly, it was pretty good because it was under the Roman system. So in all of history prior to this, it was a great road system, but it was very primitive compared to what we have today. Today we have exit ramps and multiple lanes, and there's a car accident. Maps, we'll use the GPS, will take us another route. There's frontage roads. And you think about it, if you want to go someplace, if you want to go to the Loop, there's a number of ways to get to the Loop. You could take Irving Park, or you could take the highway, or if we're going to go to Rockford or drive to Madison, Wisconsin, there's a number of ways you could go. And the people might debate the best way. They might say, well, just jump on the interstate, you get there faster. Or no, I really like to take the back way, or you go down here and then you turn there. And they can give all these different directions because we have multiple roads that connect different places. But not in the day, not when Jesus was talking here. I mean, there was one road that led from one place to another place, just one road. And so Jesus was saying, I am that road. From here to heaven, I am that road. And this is absolutely singular. Now he follows that up with, he says, I am the way. Then he says, I am the truth. And again, we see a definite article. And there's so much more than what meets the eye here when we speak of this truth. Because during Jesus' day, a lot of Western philosophy that had come out of Greece was prominent around that portion of the world. And there was also Eastern philosophy that held to some of the same things. We have got Socrates and Aristotle in the West, and you've got Eastern philosophers like Confucius and Buddha. And what we know, I mean, these guys lived a couple of hundred years before Jesus, but we know what they taught in both areas was that there were a lot of multiple small t truths, we would say. Lowercase truths. Lowercase truths are things like medicine and science and mathematics, things that we know to be true, like 2 + 2 = 4, water boils at 212 degrees, or aloe soothes sunburn. These are all lowercase truths that we know about the world around us, that we can observe and we know to be true. But all of these lowercase truths flow from this big T truth, this one singular T truth. Again, this was popular philosophy, understood and held by the people around that part of the world. This capital T truth determines all truth, all of the lowercase truths as well. And this was the common philosophy at the time. Jesus here is claiming, and again, this is so brilliant. Jesus here is claiming to be the truth, the capital T truth. I'm not one of the truths, Jesus is saying. I'm not just one of the truths who is subject to the main truth. I am the capital T truth in which all truths are subject to. In other words, Jesus is saying Socrates, Aristotle, Confucius, they were all talking about me. I am the capital T truth. If we see from this passage, there's a nail that Jesus keeps hammering away at. Singular, one way, one truth, capital T truth. He's not leaving the door open for anything else. And he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The Hebrew word here for life is the word zoe, which is not just living, but the source of life. It's where life comes from. Jesus isn't just alive. Jesus is the source of life. He's saying, I am the source for your life. It was his resurrection, the eternal life that he regained in his resurrection, that he makes available to us. He says, I am your source of life. If you will attach yourself to me, you will have my truth, my life. And then he says something that's so politically incorrect. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now, that's not me saying this. This is Jesus. Jesus is saying, if you want to get to heaven, here's how it's going to happen. You're going to have to go through me. Not through religious rituals, not through a prophet or a priest or an ideology or a philosophy. And there may be some good stuff and good teaching and nice things out there, but we're not talking about how to get along with each other and all of that. We are talking about how to get to heaven. And Jesus is saying, and you only get there through him, through Jesus, according to Jesus himself. We forget what our world has made Jesus into. That's what Jesus says. He says, it's about myself. It's not about what people say about me. I am saying to you, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The way for you to get to heaven is through me. That's the most important truth about me. And if it's true, what Jesus is saying, if what Jesus is saying is true, we'd better pay attention. And if we're denying that to be true, we're saying Jesus was either a liar, because that's what he said, or that he was crazy. I mean, was Jesus a liar? Do you think he was a half-baked nut? Or was he really the honored prophet that everyone wants to say he is? Someone worth listening to. And if that is the case, then he's not just a good guy. He is God, and he is the only road that leads to heaven. That's what Jesus is saying. Now, we've got some observations that I want to give to you. These are all in your notes, and if you're not familiar with our notes, on our app, you can actually go to the sermon notes. You can fill in the blanks real easily just on your phone, on our app, and then you can email the PDF to yourself so you can have a copy of this, and I encourage you to do that. But here's the first observation I want to give. Sincerity is not all that matters. Now, I know this isn't a popular view, but Jesus was not politically correct, so we got to go here. A common thought today is, well, it doesn't matter what you believe as long as you are sincere. I mean, that's all that matters. And this is a load of, well, you know what. Because you can be sincere and be sincerely wrong. The terrorists on 9/11, were they sincere about their personal beliefs? Absolutely. And probably arguably more than most professing Christians. Well, did they honor God with that sincerity? Did God say, oh, I know you killed some people, but you were sincere, so I'll let you in? Of course not. Or what about the Nazis? The Nazis sincerely believed that the work that they were doing, creating the purest race, that this was beneficial to the world. They thought they were giving the world a gift. And a lot of people died because they believed in this, and they gave their lives for this. They were very sincere. Well, did God say, well, they were wrong and performed major atrocities, but at least they were sincere? No! Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying sincerity doesn't matter. Sincerity matters. Jesus calls for sincerity from his followers. But sincerity must rest in truth for it to be legitimate. Sincerity only matters if it is coupled with truth, because you can sincerely believe something that is false. And for example, one of my favorite quotes came from General Sedgwick of the Union Army in the Civil War. And Sedgwick took his men into battle in 1864. And they were approaching a battlefield, and he was embarrassed because his men were like hiding, afraid of the bullets from the enemy, from the Confederates. And so he's up on his horse, and he's riding up and down, and he goes, don't be ridiculous. He said this. This is General Sedgwick. They couldn't hit an elephant at this distance. And at that moment, he keeled over off his horse, dead on the ground, had been hit in the head from one of those sharpshooters who couldn't hit an elephant from that distance. His last words. He sincerely believed they couldn't hit him, but he was very wrong. Sincerity is not all that matters. In fact, if it doesn't rest in truth, it doesn't matter at all. Second observation. Truth does matter. Now, we live in a world where relativism is king. Relativism says what is true for you may not be true for me. What's true for them is different from what's true for us. So let's just all get along and not debate what we believe. In fact, a recent study shows that 49% of Americans strongly believe in relativism. What's ironic about that is that 49%, that's half of Americans, strongly believe that you can't strongly believe. And yet they strongly believe that you can't strongly believe. The fact is, and we're seeing this today, where there's no absolute truth, there is nothing that binds us together. There's no order, there's no structure. It's chaos. And relativism may sound nice, like, oh, let's just get along. You have your truth, I have mine. Everyone's happy with their own reality. But not only does that breed chaos, it's just a false reality. Jesus himself, on other occasions, reiterated that there was such thing as truth. And if you know the crucifixion story, you know what he said to Pontius Pilate outside of Pilate's headquarters. He said to Pilate, for this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. And we know that in another place, he said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Truth mattered to Jesus, because according to Jesus, heaven and hell is a matter of the truth. Truth matters. And then third observation, Jesus' preparations matter. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, remember, Jesus said, I'm going to prepare a place for you. He said, I'm the one making preparations. I'm the one getting things ready. I go to prepare a place for you. And I used to think, and I used to preach, that Jesus was the creator. We know Jesus was the creator. He was with God, with all of creation. Paul talked about this. He was there with God in Genesis 1. And so when he said, I'm going to prepare a place for you, I used to think and I used to preach that, oh, he was going to heaven to build heaven and make it beautiful. And he's been doing that for 2,000 years. I can't imagine what my place is going to look like. And as cool as that sounds, it's really not what Jesus was saying here. It's not what he meant. Instead, it's not like Jesus up there, with a hammer and pounding away and saying, hang on, Father, I'll do the rapture in a minute, but I want to finish these cabinets here first. That's not what's going on here. That's not what he means. What his preparations were, it wasn't with a hammer and saw. It was on the cross. Jesus was telling his followers, I am on my way to Jerusalem to prepare this place for you. That preparation took place through his work on the cross, his death, then his burial, and his resurrection from the dead. That was his preparation. Hanging from the cross, that is how he prepared a place for you. The place isn't being prepared depending on how good you are, if you reach a certain enlightenment. It's already been prepared. Jesus wasn't talking about heaven, that he's building heaven. No, he was talking about the means by which we enter the way into heaven, which is the cross. The weight of our sin and shame and guilt on his shoulders so that we could be delivered. And it's that, and only that. Jesus' gift for us on the cross, that preparation is our only way into heaven. In fact, think about this. If there were many ways to heaven, then God is terribly cruel. I mean, for him to make Jesus put on skin, live among us as a poor yet perfect man, for him to experience betrayal, utter loneliness, beatings, blood loss, crucifixion, for what? If there was another way, if there was another way for us to get into heaven, I mean, Jesus himself had prayed in the garden saying, Father, if there's any other way, let's go the other way. But there was no other way, and Jesus knew there was no other way. That's why he went to the cross, because he is our only hope. If there were another way, then God was just plain cruel to torture and slaughter his only son. All the while there being many other ways for us to get to heaven, that would make God incredibly cruel to his own beloved son. For us, or for you, to claim that there are many ways, many roads that lead to heaven is pointing a finger at God the Father and making him out to be a cruel father who tortured his son for no reason. But that is not who our Heavenly Father is. Jesus came because he was our only hope. Jesus died the terrible death. He died because he was our only way to be saved. Jesus' death for us was the preparation that he was talking about with his disciples in this passage. I'm going to prepare a place for you. And because of that preparation, when God looks at you, he doesn't see your sin, your guilt. He doesn't see your mess. He doesn't see your past. He sees the righteousness of his son. He sees Jesus. Can you imagine that? When you accept Jesus as Lord and Savior, the God of the universe looks at you and doesn't see a screw up. The God of the universe sees the righteousness and the love that he has for his son. He sees that in you because you have become one with Jesus. That's what Jesus did. That was the preparation, and that matters. Nothing else prepares you for the next life. Jesus' preparation does. Sadly, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, good deeds, but none of that cuts it. Nobody will get us to the Father except Jesus. And that's according to Jesus. So, it sounds like Christianity is pretty exclusive. Jesus being the only way, only truth, only life. Ziegler, you're being exclusive. Yes, to a point. Because of what Jesus said about himself, as well as the evidence that backed it up from his life, his resurrection. The followers of Jesus believe that there's no salvation apart from Jesus. There's no forgiveness apart from Jesus. There's no eternal life apart from Jesus. There's no hope apart from Jesus. That is what we believe. So in that regard, Christianity is exclusive like every other worldview is. But Christianity is also the most inclusive faith. In many religions, you need to be this way or that way or do these things. You need to be a part of a race or an ethnicity group or a people group to communicate with God. Yet Jesus invites all groups. The more groups, the more beauty. In many religions, you need to know a certain language to communicate with a god or the gods. Yet Christians speak and worship in many languages. In many religions, you need to adapt to a culture. You got to speak a certain way or wear certain clothes. You got to dress a certain way, be all fancy. I mean, you look at me, you can see we aren't like that. Some religions only take the affluent and the wealthy, and you got to give a certain amount of money, usually to feed the beast of whatever rich charlatan is leading that group. But Jesus and his followers call people just like themselves, the poor and the downtrodden. The church is made up of all social classes. Most religions care a lot about your rap sheet. They'll only take the good, many times the self-righteous. Yet Christianity beckons the most reprehensible of people because we understand how far all of us are from God without Jesus. Yes, Christianity is exclusive, but because Jesus is, but it is also the most inclusive of faiths. And the truth is, Jesus wants to include you. He wants to open your eyes to the truth. He wants the truth to set you free, freer than you've ever been. He's made preparations, the blood, the cross, the empty tomb. He's done everything to make it happen. Your sin has a price. But that has been paid by Jesus. There is a room in his insula for you. There is room in the Father's house. The question is, will you accept the invitation? You can right here, right now. I love Romans 10 where the Apostle Paul writes, whoever confesses with their mouth that Jesus is Lord, that is who he says he is, and believes in their heart that God has raised him from the dead, that is, he being the source of life, coming back from the dead, putting your trust in what he did for you. Paul says, if you will simply do that, you'll just trust in his resurrection, believing who he is, you will be saved. See, the preparations are made. It's the truth. It's the way. It's the life. Take the invitation. And for those of us who have, though, I want to ask you, how are you doing with Jesus? It's interesting, after Jesus got done with his incredible speech, I'm going to prepare a place for you. I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life. This amazing moment in history. Philip, one of the disciples, he speaks up then in verse 9. And I wonder if this is any of us. Philip says, Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for us. He simply says something like, you seem to really know the Father. You're on a first-name basis with him. It sounds like you're so close. Could you ask him to make an appearance? That'd be enough for us. And you know how Jesus responded? He says, don't you know me? Because I and the Father are one. He said to them, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. I am enough for you. He is the way. He is the truth. He is the life. So we close with this. Is Jesus enough for you? That's our so what question. Is Jesus enough for you? Is he enough for your salvation? Have you taken the invite to the preparations he's made? If not, now's the time, right here, right now. What are you waiting for? Just reach out to him. Accept him. And for those who have taken the way, then my question is like with Philip. Is he enough? Oh, you know he's the way, you know he's the truth. Are you letting him be your source of life? Is Jesus enough for you? Father, thank you for this great passage, these words of Jesus himself. I thank you so much that the clarity that this gives to us. And while we may struggle with what the rest of our culture and people around the world, or what they think and what they believe, I thank you for giving to us this absolute clear understanding of what Jesus himself said. And if we're going to believe Jesus' words, it's abundantly clear. He is our way to heaven. And so, Father, I pray in the name of Jesus, all who are watching, that they will put their faith and trust in him alone. And may all of us, seeing him as the way, the source of all truth, believing him, the source of all of our lives, that we would live the rest of our days for him, taking us all the way on into eternity. In Jesus' name we ask. Amen.